friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird's Word Buddies Jungle, Word Buddies Woodland, Cake Time, and A Little Present from Christmas is Coming. So I've stamped those images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'm going to be coloring to match some pattern paper from the Cartabella Here, There, and Everywhere 6x6 pad. So I'll tear that out and tuck that under my cardstock panel. I am going to be coloring with my Copic markers, and before I begin, I'm actually going to pull out some reference photos that I've created coloring some elephants and gorillas in different color palettes. I also have one where I've done foxes, but I have an elephant and a gorilla on today's card, so I just used those charts to decide which color palette I wanted to go for each of those critters on today's card. So I'm going to use the toner grays for my elephant. I'm using T0, T1, T3, and T5, starting with the T5 and laying in some shadows. I like to have my critters' faces be nice and highlighted, so I put the shadows down the back of their body. That also usually determines where they get placed on the card. So critters that are facing toward the right usually get placed on the left for me, and critters that are facing toward the left usually get placed on the right. Today it's not going to matter because they're all going to be in a different position, but anyway, I'm going to keep their faces nice and light so it's consistent across the board. So I blended out in the reverse using the T3, then the T1, and then a little bit of that T0. And now I'm going to go back in with my T5 and just add a few little dots to give his skin some texture, just to make him a little bit more interesting. And then I'll move on to my gorilla, and I decided to go with the cool grays for him today. I like my critters all to be in different tones, so cool grays for him. C0, C1, C3, C5, and C7. And 5 colors may seem excessive, but I'm only using the darkest 3 for the majority of his body, and then the lightest 2 for his face and hands and feet. So C7 is what I'm starting with for the shadows up at the top of the head, down on the bottom of the thigh and the back of the arm, which is actually the front of the arm, but it's kind of facing away, it's kind of like pressed against his side there, so it wouldn't be getting as much light. Blending out with the C5, then the C3 is going to be my lightest, right around his face, the top of his arm as it's facing toward the light, on the top of his thigh. I'll also color a little bit onto the edge where his belly starts, just so I can transition into the C1 for that area. Also use those on his hands and feet and his face like I mentioned, and then I'll use the C0 to finish him off. I'm going to skip over to my koala next so I can get all of my grays out of the way, and to make him as different as possible I'm going to go to the warm grays. So I'm using W00, W1, W3, and W5. I think the warm grays, really do resemble koala's fur the closest because it has that warm kind of tawny color to it. So I'm starting with the W5 around the outer part of the face, the back of the shoulders and legs, tops of the ears where they're closest to the body where they wouldn't get as much light. Blending out with the W3 and then the W1, and then the W00 is only on the inner ear and the feet. For the lion, I'm going to use Y11, YR21, and the YR23. So I wanted to use those YR shades because they're more tawny. They do resemble a lion a lot more. But I wanted to brighten it up with the Y11 to match the yellow in the pattern paper. It's much more of a vibrant yellow, so that's going to help me pull this lion into the color palette. So I started with the YR23, blended out with the YR21, and then used the Y11 for the highlight. Sometimes I'll use the YR20 for the highlight and then color completely over that with the Y11, and that does blend a little bit better, but I just decided to skip the YR20 for whatever reason today. It just takes a little bit more effort. But I am switching to the E30s for his mane. I'm using E33, E35, and E37 for that. I put the darkest closest to the face and then the highlight toward the edges where again it would just be catching the most light. And then I am going to move on. Oh, I also did his little tail there. I didn't want to forget that, the tuft at the end of his tail. Then I'll move on to my monkey. And again, like I said, I want to switch it up and make each critter its own shade. So for the monkey, I'm going to use the E50s. I'm using E55, E57, and E59 for the majority of his body. And then I'll introduce some lighter colors in just a minute for the rest. So E59 for the shadows, and then I am blending that out with the E57. I was very careful to only leave a little line with that E59 because it is quite dark and I didn't want him to get like overwhelmed. If the colors are too deep and dark and saturated, sometimes you can lose the features, especially when you're coloring the face, but also little areas like the tiny details of his little thumbs on his hands. All of that can get lost if the coloring is too dark, so I always try to only add a little bit of that so it makes your highlights look even lighter. And then for the rest of his body, his face, belly, hands, and feet, I'm going to use E50, E51, and E53. So everything blends really nicely and just looks very cohesive for him. I love this little monkey. I think he's so cute with his hands over his mouth. I just love that. For the sloth, I'm going to switch it up once again and go with the E40s. These have more of like a grayish tone to them. They're like part brown, part gray. And so I think they lend themselves really well to sloths. This is like my go-to combo for sloths. So E43, E44, and E47 is what I'm going to use for the main part of his body. And I'm also going to use these shades for his little eye patches. Normally sloths have darker eye patches, so I could have gone one shade darker, but like I said, I just get so nervous about losing the eyes. So I just decided to add a little extra of that E47, but made sure to really blend it out with the other two shades so that don't get lost there. And then for his face, I'll use E40, E41, and E42. So just like with the monkey, it's all staying in the same color family, so it just looks very intentional and cohesive. So now that I am done with my critters, I'm going to move on to my accessory images, and this is where I'm going to really start pulling in the color palette. I'm going to start by giving all of my critters some rosy cheeks with R20 and R11. I also have the R22 out because I knew I was going to use it for some of the accessory images, but right now I'm just using those lighter two shades, laying down a little R20 first on all of their cheeks and then blending around the edges of that with the R11. And then I'm also going to color the insides of some of their ears with that R11. For the lion, I also did have to add a little R20 because it wasn't dark enough, but I only used the R11 for the monkey and the gorilla, and the other critters I just left. I didn't think it would look right to have pink there. But I will use all three shades for one of the ribbons on the gifts, one of the pom-poms on the party hats. I'm also going to do an envelope, just outlining the edges of that with the R22, blending with the R20, and then a touch of that R11. And then I'll darken up this combo into a red to represent the red banner, and I'll use R24 and R29 with that. I did a cherry on top of the cupcake, one of the stripes on the party hat, the one that has the stripes, and then also the balloon. So started with the R29 for all of that, then blended out with the R24, and then used the R22 for the highlight. And I am occasionally doing a second layer on some items if I want the blend to just be a little bit more smooth or I want them to be a bit more saturated, but I typically do that off screen just to save some time in the video. So I've moved on to my yellow combo. I used Y13, Y15, and Y17 to do the frosting on the cupcake, the star on the party hat, and then a stripe on the last party hat. I also did the ribbon on the other gift. And then I'm going to move on to green. And the green is more of like a duller green. It's not like super bright yellow green. It's just more of like a desaturated green. So I went with G40, G43, and G46. I did the little ball on the striped hat. I did the gift wrap on one of the gifts. And the main part of the party hat with the pink pom-pom. And then for the blue, it's more of like a blue-violet. It's not quite purple, but not quite blue. So the closest that I could match it with my Copic color chart was BV20, BV23, and BV25. And I actually really love these markers. I don't use them very often, but they are very similar to the cool grays. So I wish that they were just a little bit brighter, but I do really, really like them. So I used that for one of the party gifts. I did the party hat with the star on the top, the last stripe on the striped party hat, and the other envelope. I decided I didn't want to do the cupcake liner in that shade. I thought it would be too much with the cool gray as well. So I went back to my green combo for that. And then I got a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen started at the top so I could go over my critter's eyes to make them bright and shiny again. Everybody except for the sloth since his eyes aren't open. And then I trimmed these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm taking a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock and I'm going to press some Stormy Sky Distress Oxide ink onto an acrylic block and just paint that into the center. I'm just being very sloppy with it because I want there to be patches where it's darker and patches where it's lighter. So I'll add a bit of ink down and then add a bit of water and just make it look very cloudy and organic looking. And then once I'm happy with it, I'm doing a circular shape because I am going to have a window in the center of my card. And then I will tap a little bit as well to add a few little drops and splatter detail to it just to give it a bit more interest. And then once I'm happy with how this is looking, I'm going to set this aside to dry until it dries completely. Because I didn't lay down too much ink, it didn't take very long. And then I'm going to stamp my sentiment. I'm using the birthday script stamp set from Hello Bluebird and inking that up in VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I inked that up twice so it would be nice and bold, and then I'll pop my card base in my MISTI. It is Lawn Fawn Speckled Eggshell cardstock, and I'm stamping in Forget Me Not ink. And the sentiment is from the birthday script, and then the little bunny is from Cake Time. And he is another image that I just really, really love. So now it's time to go back to my pattern paper pad, that Cardabella Here, There, and Everywhere pad. And I'm going to choose a couple of prints to go along with the banner. So I'm just flipping back and forth and trying to see if I could use any of my scraps, but I really wanted this red stripe. I just thought it suited the jungle critters well. And then I really liked this bold navy print with it. So these are the three that I am going to use. So I'm going to trim these down. The red print I trimmed down to be 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, so it's a standard size card. And then the banner print I trimmed down, I think it was 3.5 by 5.5. So I'm going to run that down the center of the card and just have that go vertically top to bottom. Then I'm going to take one of the Hello Bluebird nesting circle dies. I'm using the 8th smallest one. So if you count from the top, I'm using number 8. And I'm just figuring out where I want that placed on my card. And then I will tape that into position with a little bit of Post-it tape. Then I'm going to skip a die and then take the next one. So skipping number 9 and using number 10. Made sure that that was the right fit. And then I'll tape this one over the navy blue print. And then I'll run both of these panels through my die cutting machine. So then I can pop out those inner circles. I am not going to use those on today's card, but you could always save them and use them on something else. For today, I'm only going to use the negative space. So I can set those circles aside, and I am going to glue these together so that they form, the navy one forms like an inner circle to the outer frame. So I'm adding some liquid glue all around the edge, but not right up close, because I actually want to leave a little bit of space to be able to tuck my critters down inside. So I'm just going to line those up until I have them straight. I'm eyeballing it, but as straight as I can. And then I added a whole bunch of foam tape to the back of this to make sure that it was well supported, especially because it's only pattern paper. So it can be a bit flimsy, so I wanted to have that really well supported in case this is a card that gets sent through the mail, so that nothing buckles and bends. You know, I want the card to still look as I made it, you know. So I'm peeling off those release papers to the foam tape, and then I'm going to line that up over the painted background so that that sentiment is right in the center, and then I'll press that down into place. And then I'll add some liquid glue to the back of that. And then I will line that up on my card front. Make sure that those corners are all square. And then smooth that down into place. So now I can bring in my images, and the first thing I'm going to do is just lay out all of my critters and figure out the spacing of them. So I'm not attaching anything at this point, but because I do have this circular window to work with, it can be a little bit tricky to get things placed just right. So I want to look at it visually before I commit. So I'm just tucking everything in there. And it was fairly tight. I think it is because the foam tape is already on there, and so that made the paper quite stiff, and so it was hard to get my critters down in between those layers, even though I did leave room with the glue. So it might have been easier to assemble the focal panel before I adhered it to the card. But anyway, it's fine. It was still fine. I could get them down in there. It was just a little bit trickier. I kind of had to slide them around a little bit on the edge between those two pieces, and you know, get the edge of the cardstock wedged under there to get them to fit. My elephant, I couldn't get him down further so that he wouldn't stick out too much, so I had to cut off his little feet and tail, unfortunately, but he still looks very cute there. I wanted to use him because I just think he's such an adorable image, and I love the way his trunk is raised up, and so I had to have him on the card, but he was just a little bit too tall as he was. So now that I have the placement of my critters how I want them, I'm just going to take a little piece of foam tape and tuck it underneath their heads. So they don't actually have any liquid glue securing them to the card, but because their feet are wedged between the pattern paper and then the foam tape is holding them in place, they're not going to go anywhere. They're going to stay put. So I'm just working my way around, making sure that everybody is attached to the card with the foam tape and that they are still lined up where I want them to be. So they're kind of like spokes on a wheel. equidistant from each other. And then I can start working on the accessory images. The first one that I wanted to attach was the balloon. And it didn't quite work out the way that I intended it to. In the original design, it was actually in a different place. The gorilla had the balloon, but I couldn't get it to not cover up the sentiment, so I had to find another place for it or not use it. But otherwise, I didn't have the right number of accessory images because I wanted like one accessory image between each critter. I just have this thing with things being placed evenly. I don't know. I like things to be visually just equal weight. So I eventually did go back and decide to add it to the monkey's tail. And I do think it looks cute there. And it was the best place where it would not cover up any part of the sentiment. So that is where it stayed. So then I can move on to the other accessory images, and I'm going to work on the party hats next. And again, I am going to space these evenly. So only 3 of the critters are going to get party hats because otherwise I just felt like it might be too much. And I felt like some of them, like the monkey, it might be too close to the sentiment. So I just picked 3 and made sure that I did one and then skipped one, did one, skipped one. So I wasn't sure if I was going to start with the lion, but I ended up not giving him a party hat. I went with the koala, the gorilla, and the sloth. So each of them got a little party hat. The rest of the accessory images, I'm just going to tuck in between each of the critters. So I don't need any foam tape for those because they are on the blue pattern paper, which is popped up. So I'm just sticking those in like I did with the critters at first and figuring out where I want everything to go. Trying to make sure that no 2 of the same image are next to each other and no 2 of the same color are right next to each other. So I just swapped out the envelopes and then I'm going to start gluing those down once I'm happy with them. So I put the cupcake next to the lion, and then from there I just kind of worked out and switched back and forth between what I was using. But the more I kept adhering these things, the more I kept realizing that there was still too much visual space between the sloth and the monkey. I just really didn't like it, so I decided to stamp and color another cupcake. So I moved the envelope over between the sloth and the monkey so that it would be evenly spaced, and then replaced that with another cupcake up at the top between the sloth and the elephant. And I really like that, even though the balloon was supposed to be the extra accessory image, I just like the weight of that better with the extra cupcake. So I'm adding a few extra speckle details with my BV markers, which are a good match for that Stormy Sky Distress ink. I just felt like there wasn't enough splatter detail and I wanted there to be a bit more interest around that sentiment. So I did that with the Copics. And then I wanted to add a few sequins. I did 5 sequins in total, 3 toward the bottom and 2 at the top. So I'm just picking those up with my Studio Katia embellishment wand and gluing those down into place. I let those dry for about a minute and then I'm going to start adding some Stardust stickles to my card. I did it to the cherries on the cupcakes, the pom-poms or star on the party hat, the ribbons on the gift. I did a little on the balloon and also a little on the top of the envelopes. And then I also filled in the centers of all of my sequins. And that is going to finish this one up. I will lift that up to the camera so you can see all the detail and catch some of that sparkle and shine. There's another peek at the inside. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this one. I love these little jungle critters so much. I think they're so sweet, so I was so happy to get to use them again. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to hit that like button. You can leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. Subscribe if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted whenever I post new videos. All of the products I used are listed and linked in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you would also enjoy. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.